Costello circled the block several times before finally figuring his way into a parking structure. He grabbed a ticket and tossed it on the dash. There was a childish giddiness about him, fully liberated and engaged in a city he'd never experienced. He was knocked down a peg at the first cocktail bar he walked up to because he opted for shorts. Unfortunately, shorts weren't valued at this establishment. They recommended some pubs and dive bars that would welcome him regardless of how much leg skin he was showing off. Costello asked the doorman if he could tell him a bar joke before he left. This enormous doorman obliges him. Costello clears his throat and starts laughing before getting a word out. The doorman gets a chuckle himself and asks, "Joke's that good, huh?" Costello laughs even harder and says, "Quite the opposite." They both engage in an unstoppable roar of laughter. Costello finally settles himself and fires off. Judas and Medusa walk into a bar. The barkeep quickly acknowledges the irony while keeping his eyes averted from contact with Medusa. Judas leans over and says, "Take our order from her. Trust me." The barkeep looks over and turns to stone. Judas mumbles under his breath, "No one should ever suppress the feminine, or my betrayal." The doorman blows all the air from his mouth, flapping his lips in a bit of disgust and despair. He tells Costello, "Enjoy the rest of your night, buddy." Costello winked at him and thanked him for his patience. He set sail for his first official stop. First bar was impressive. A vintage, cash-only bar with a perpetual darkness that suited him nicely. A tap wall that would keep you busy for hours. After a few pints, however, the beer-only menu became a problem for someone with an añejo taste. He dropped a stack of cash down, covering his bill and a substantial tip. In the bar community, there's a bond that is often recognized by the weight of your generosity. Now it's time to find a good Boilermaker. The next stop had a nice patio, well pushed out on the sidewalk and al fresco with a happy hour Boilermaker you couldn't pass up. 3 Boilermakers deep, and that was enough beer for Costello. He conjured up another bar joke to share with the bartender to break the ice before shifting gears to strictly hard liquor. Costello stands at the bar for a few minutes observing the bartenders. As an alumni, he had a soft spot for the trade. He admired the hustle, the patience, and the wit, all colliding together like a galaxy of stars creating a beautiful image in the night sky. He spotted a lull in a female bartender and moved over to her area. Another idiosyncrasy with the craft was you never yell at, wave at, or snap at a bartender, ever. As a patron, hope they engage you. If that fails, then move in as close as possible. She noticed his etiquette and attended to him like clockwork. She appreciated the patience so much, she offered to buy him a drink. Costello said, "Well, I'd be dumb as a monk trying to find Valhalla if I turned down a free drink." She asked if he was having another Boilermaker, and he went on to explain how he needed to elevate his blood alcohol content so he could conjure an entire cast of imaginary drinking chums to help him get to the bottom of why he's struggling socializing with people in the real world. She said, "Well, it looks like you're doing a fine job without them, but I'll drink to that. What's it going to be?" Costello asked for a double añejo and respectfully told her to keep it reasonable since she was comping. She poured each of them, lifted her glass, and said, "May that monk make it safely to Valhalla." Costello lifted his glass and responded, "Skål." Before he shuffled back to his lonely chair on the patio, he said, "Hey, least I can do for the drink is tell you a joke." She leaned in and gave him a nonverbal affirmation. Costello started laughing and immediately put his hand up as to tell her it had nothing to do with her. She dropped her eyebrows and then raised them with curiosity. He swallowed his next wave of laughter. His lead-up to jokes were somehow always more humorous than the jokes. Costello went on. Vicente Fernandez and Rene Magritte walk into a bar. Barkeep says he's only got Pilsner on tap. Not wanting a Pilsner, Vicente says, "Pero sigo siendo el rey." The barkeep says he doesn't speak any Spanish and blows him off. Rene, also not wanting a Pilsner, intervenes and says, "I don't know if you recognize me, but I'm the this is not a pipe guy. The barkeep pours a Pilsner and says, well, then this is not a Pilsner. Costello squints his eyes and bites down, nervously awaiting her response. The bartender grabs Costello's hand and says, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Let's just chalk this up to not being the worst experience I've ever had. Costello threw down a tip for the drink she bought him and began his search for another bartender because her shift was ending. She was kind enough to direct her shiftmate to Costello so he could continue his mission. A new bartender walked up and said, no fucking jokes, bud. You doing double añejo neat again? Costello nodded and ordered another double añejo neat. He took it up one shelf this time. Then he ordered another. The synchronicity of this outing and his peace with nearly everything was staggering, and he didn't appear to have any obstructions. It was one of those days you wish you were sharing with someone just to be able to compare notes and get that confirmation you are experiencing life in its perfect simulation. So he ordered a third double and decided he would find a spot with more people so he could actually talk to someone. Just when he found the desire to interface this simulation with another human, the tequila hit his bloodstream like sugar in the gas tank. Several hours had passed, and he had no idea if he started a tab or was paying along the way. He rummaged through his wallet and saw no disturbance with his cash other than the drop from the first stop. All his credit cards were still there. He figured no better time than now to settle this up before it becomes complicated. Then he pushed $60 in his front pocket for the next stop, just in case things become confusing again. As an agoraphobic person with a tendency to wake up with no knowledge of the previous night's activities, he had become very tenacious with the awareness of the contents of his pockets, always preparing for the uncharted and always investigating the unknown. He took care of his bill and sat down briefly to catch a little bit more of the sun passing through the skyline and down onto the sidewalk as people passed by. A gust of wind pressed through the street, and he heard someone next to him say something. Here's to women who can tie a cherry stem with their tongue, walking out on your bill, and conversations so deep you need a change of clothes. Costello knew they were on their way. Right at that moment, a host gently put his hand on Costello's back and asked if he wouldn't mind leaving because customers were lining up for dinner. Costello closed his eyes and juxtaposed reality with his freight train of an imagination. He had typically pushed himself to this layer of his mind under self-controlled circumstances in his apartment. The toast he heard at the bus stop while Derek was watching him the other night was unintended and something he vaguely remembered. He knew he had to be extremely careful with what he was doing, but the alcohol would be the judge, jury, and executioner on how this was going to roll out. Costello was not a stumbling drunk. It's as though the reckoning going on in his mind allows his body to maintain a semblance of stability. So he was able to walk about town without drawing attention. Unless he started talking with his imaginary friends, the hunter embedded in Costello was chasing the pack, while his logical self was minding his appearance as to not draw attention to himself. Problem was, the añejo at the last bar was tearing down his inhibitions like termites waking up in an old Victorian. Costello stopped at an outdoor bar filled with what looked to be a vivacious bachelorette party just getting their night started. He pulled the 320s from his pocket and ordered a round of shots for this pantheon of lovely ladies. Shots arrived, and without hesitation, Costello rattled off his toast right on the fly. Here's to your night being filled with memories you can't repeat to your coworkers next Monday, health benefits and per diem for sex workers, and suffering sleep paralysis during a home invasion. He closed with a little detail about himself, and he bid them farewell. Costello demonstrated a freeness that emanated from his being. The details were mostly cryptic in nature and got a mixed bag of reaction from the crowd, but they appreciated the shot, so overall he was applauded and sent on his way. One of the women took a long gaze at Costello before he left. He pulled himself over next to a parking meter and replenished the $60 he had handy in his front pocket. Just as he got settled, he hears a familiar voice tell him that was one of the best toasts yet. It suited the crowd, came from the heart, and proved he had the ability to take the stage without their help. "Don't fool yourself, though, young man. We aren't going anywhere tonight." The dominant voice made damn sure Costello understood where they stood. Costello took a moment to recognize he hadn't logged the location of the parking structure, and he never plugged his phone into the Bluetooth, so the Jeep wasn't pinned. Plus, he left the ticket in the Jeep, so he didn't know the name of the structure. He was slipping into an extremely drunken state, so he quickly pinned his location and figured he would find it tomorrow. On to what would inevitably be his final stop. Push his blood alcohol level to the limit, find someone to chat with, and then head back to the hotel to join his spectral friends. Costello walked past Hellas Liquor and became enthralled by a large mural of a man and woman dancing. He fancied this piece of art. It was the first he seemed to connect with since taking to the Seattle streets. He looked up at the two dancing and asked if he could tell them a joke. The term joke was becoming rather suspect. However, he continued. Edgar Allan Poe and Noam Chomsky walk into a bar. The barkeep looks at Poe and asks if he's the guy who wrote romance novels. Poe quietly responds to the barkeep with, "Romanticism. I wrote romanticism." Barkeep expresses extreme confusion, but continues mixing cocktails. A frustrated Chomsky looks up from his phone and says, "Poe's lovers die, young man. They are sure to fucking die." Costello decided this would be his landmark for calling a car and getting back to the hotel. He found the abyss long before he would make it to his last bar stop. His last memory is ensuring himself this mural would be his landing zone. The alcohol had other plans.